So I want to pass the mic over to Sarah Adlew to introduce our next talk. Thank you.
Okay, so for our afternoon plenary session, we have Marianne Patinelli-Dubay here with us. And Marianne works at the Huntington Wildlife Forest, which is a 1,500-acre research and demonstration forest owned and managed by SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And she also teaches practical ethics and workshops and short courses for land managers. So we're very thankful to have Marianne's unique perspective here, a very important perspective for all of us who think about these really big issues related to forests that will long outlive us if we're doing things right. Marianne serves as the New York State Chair of the Society of American Foresters and Chair of SAF's National Ethics Committee. And the session ahead of us is going to involve a talk from Marianne, and then we will transition to a panel for the second half that is our Young Voices Old Forests panel, where we will be able to take some of the wisdom that Marianne shared with us and tie it into ideas from youth voices that are involved in this conference of how we think about old growth forests and what we are passing along to future generations. So Marianne, we are ready for you.
How's that? I'm audible? Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I'm delighted to speak alongside this panel of students and young professionals. There are 3 of them that'll be joining me here after I finish. I thank you to Sarah Adlew for extending the invitation to be here, and to Liz Thompson for her thoughtful attention to detail in coordination. I'm dedicating my remarks to my friend Bill Vitek, who is here by the skin of his teeth at the last minute. Upon hearing that I would be referencing Zen Master Dogen's Mountains and Waters Sutra, Bill literally and in front of people laughed out loud, which, if you know me, is totally fair. And Bill, you will not be surprised to know that I've managed to work a quote from St. Augustine into these remarks. But truly, Bill exemplifies the depth of character, the integrity, the courage, and the levity that preservation work requires. Months ago, before Sarah invited me here, I was on a road headed north from Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico towards the Legal Tender Saloon, when my friend mentioned that Gary Snyder had been asked, why bother trying to save wild earth given the challenges that we're up against? And Snyder simply responded, character. Sarah's invitation to be here with you all came through the next day as I was traveling home, and soon after that, some things that had seemed separate from one another were now rising up like the joins and relates of map layers, creating a dimensional profile. Of course, Gary Snyder reminded me of Zen, and that question, along with his response, struck me as an important place to start considering why we do this work, each of us in our own way, to preserve old growth. And what does it say about us that we persist? From there, this cascade of perceptions and ideas fell out, and New Mexico was collapsing into Vermont and folding back into the West, into watercolors and Georgia O'Keeffe, like a vivid dream that wants interpretation, and which became this letter to the young professionals here tonight. I hope some of what I'll share helps you to proceed with a disposition that is up to the task that's ahead of you in your work as part of a life dedicated to the good. In June, the wide horizon of Vermont ripples into view as I reach the height of land on New York's side of Lake Champlain. There, a familiar contour divides the liquid blue of distant mountains from the sky. During the months between deep winter and spring, a low-slung hill closer in is more brown than green, and its vegetation appears smaller and generously spaced. And always, my eye reads Vermont, where my memory sees New Mexico. No longer cresting an Adirondack ridge, I am on the high road out of Santa Fe, descending into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Then, once June arrives, the Sangres recede, and that same Vermont hill blooms into the deep green that my eye anticipates when I am at home in the east. The cycle is always the same, season after season. The Blue Mountains are constantly walking. Here I was looking at a mountain right in front of me and simultaneously seeing one that was very far away. This nested awareness struck me as an illustration of practice realization. Practice realization seems to me that moment when understanding dawns on us as we're going about our business, not looking for revelation in the midst of some experience in the world. It has been said that you can't understand Buddhism until you have met someone in whom it is alive. In my case, I could not grasp even this one teaching until I had been alive in its questions long enough to see it materialize in the world, in the moment of contact between these two mountains, between an idea and my senses, and the realization that true understanding comes in the course of living something out. What I understood in a more than intellectual way was suddenly the all-in-all interconnectedness of things, and Dogen's caution to, quote, not doubt mountains walking, even though it does not look the same as human walking, end quote. That kind of understanding comes to light in harmony with feeling and of being alert in the world, free from the bondage of object and mind. With this moment of awareness revealed to me, and what I think Master Dogen is trying to teach, is wise counsel for the kind of work that you do and for the kind of work that the students here will do. The experience of seeing these two mountains walking signifies the glide that we all undergo as our awareness drifts from the world beneath our feet to the one behind our eyes, and in a similar way, relative to the start of your careers, from the world that we inhabit originally and the one that we set out into at the start of our search for meaning or for truth, or into what world we are called to salvage. We start out, and then we fall away from what moved and motivated us, and from what we felt called to. And then we inhabit a new territory until eventually we return, if changed, to our native habitat. This process involves a combination of imagination, desire, and memory that is a kind of peripatetic response to a sensual encounter through sight, smell, taste, and exertion within the natural world. Philosophy and theology teach that these two realms, the here and now and the far away nearby, as Georgia O'Keeffe wrote, are interpenetrating fields. The arena of the divine and the ideal touches upon and calls out to earth the domain of humans, animals, plants, and planets. Rather than being disorienting, this is an ordinary way of occupying two worlds in parallel, the world as it is and the world as it ought to be, as we hope it will be, especially as it concerns our current challenge of preserving and protecting old-growth forests. A few weeks before this all struck me, I had been walking for hours along burro trails, bending out of the dry sun into low and cool sanctuaries where the walls had the hand-smoothed topography of mud pressed over hay that had pushed to the surface in the years since the contour of northern New Mexico was shaped into these brown Botticelli buildings. There are no angles or edges, there are just the curves, the way anything hand-done naturally emerges in the round. And as in architecture, so too in life. I went from ruins to refuge, drawn like a person finding quiet who has spent too long in the noise, like a person who has been constantly walking over Dogen's green mountains, who is becoming still. It was a day, it was a decade, it is ongoing, this pilgrimage. My experience took on the fullness and the curvature of the adobe walls. I had gone out there along a linear path for a purpose and discovered myself on more of a bow than a straight line. There was a lushness to the whole thing which was hard to square with the abandonment of a desert. Further on in my search, the O'Keeffe Museum was showing her works on paper. The drawings that she made before she became Georgia O'Keeffe were a series of fiddlehead shapes done in charcoal and grayscale. The paintings that she completed just prior to her death were all some variation on the same, all curves and dry puddles where fugitive pigment ran over the paper. All of her iconic work, the flowers, the buildings, the bones that characterize her career, hung in the middle rooms, and they were nothing like these curves on either end. I was struck by the clarity of Georgia's return, an artist's rendering of her interior world. From the rounded architecture around me to her fiddleheads, I couldn't let loose the sense that we circled back. But in the midst of life, in the working and the angling, in the striving and the lostness, and amidst all the casting about, we lose sight of that native understanding, that original way that we saw the world, why it was good, and what we are meant for within its material constraints. This progression from Georgia's first position to the one she adopted in order to be seen and bought by the public, and then back to her native shapes, struck me as an illustration of Dogen's statement, "Before one studies Zen, mountains are mountains and waters are waters. After a first glimpse into the truth of Zen, mountains are no longer mountains and waters are no longer waters. After enlightenment, mountains are once again mountains and waters once again waters," end quote. The shape of our journey might be what Georgia was getting at in her return to these forms, except if we are not artists, but philosophers, ecologists, foresters, then these are the paths that our minds travel to circumnavigate an idea. They are the way we make sense of the world in a kind of habitus or a path that we wear into the earth that takes the form of our lives, our living, and our vocations. I wonder if we return out of habit or need, out of a desire to make sense of one turn, or if it is like she said, that we just each of us have one shape in us or one route that we're built to travel. Every spiritual and philosophical tradition has tried to reconcile these two complete worlds, the one that we cherish, that is eternal and timeless, with the one that in the language of Buddhism is constantly walking. But Dogen's Green Mountains, this breathing world, is not the only thing on the move. He says, if you doubt mountains walking, you do not know your own walking. And so it is that our embodied minds, hearts, and spirits are always gliding, gathering ideas, inspiration, and alliances. So on this path, what does it mean to see something? What memory, expectation, desire, what longing is quietly influencing your vision? Writing this talk, I kept returning to the twofold awareness that these mountains represented, that maps onto the realities of impermanence and detachment. Two attitudes that are at the heart of our capacity to hold two worlds together, that of the ideal with the natural world that is constantly changing. It sounds counterintuitive to think about conserving something and remaining detached, because conservation includes an element of want. One sees the good in a thing, sees it in peril, and so one wants to conserve it. The contradiction falls away when we understand detachment as an attitude of watchful unfolding, an inclination that holds you open to the reality that you are invested in the act of saving something that can only be saved for a time, something that exists in time, and so it is disappearing despite your efforts. St. Augustine once said that since every creature is made ex nihilo, it carries with it the heritage of non-being. There is a kind of penumbra or shadow of nothingness that haunts every finite thing. The art then is in learning to live fully and to press wholly and joyfully into the understanding and prolonging the flourishing of a world that is mysterious and fleeting by design. We pursue what we love not because we will ever succeed in the full protection of old growth, but because as we make our way towards our goal, we learn these things: that saving it or protecting it entirely is impossible, so there will be loss. That what we love will ultimately always elude us, and that we become fully human in our persistence in the act of love, nevertheless. This kind of love is radical, insofar as it is absolute, irrational, in that it will never fully succeed, and necessary, insofar as our humanity relies on its fullest expression. Despair or frustration is not the proper response to the challenge before you. Rather, it is persistence, perspective, and an ebullient spirit, character that understands that this is the path. The Mountains and Waters Sutra has something to teach us about embracing our own impermanence and that of the world around us, about the logic of detachment in a disappearing world and our responsibility towards restraint, to proceed with caution, to try to save what we love. The meaning of this teaching has resisted capture from me for 34 years. Like the ultimate desire, it has remained elusive and enchanting, promising some insight that I felt sure would enlarge my thinking if I could only get my arms around what it meant. My old book has the faded yellow highlights of a novice and tentative margin notes that show decade after decade that I was able to read the text and to point out what might be important, but I was never able to decipher what it meant and why it mattered. Now I think it's fitting that the meaning of this thread has turned away from me the more I have tried to grasp it. I think it can only be understood through life experience at the vanishing point where love and resignation fall together in a single gesture. What does it mean to say that love and resignation fall together? Well, it means that one either lets go and allows the object of our desire to be what it is, temporal, within our grasp, with the potential to flourish for a time, or risk becoming subsumed by a futile attempt to master it. The Greeks initially took Eros to be the god of chaos and the void. Only later did he become synonymous with love. This later conception of Eros as love and love as beholding carries the false impression that desire and detainment or attachment, this grasping, can occupy the same time and place. And when inevitably the beloved resists, when the thing slips from our grasp, when our aim seems to have been off the mark and capture or success becomes impossible, we are frustrated for having lost the thing we were after, the goal we meant to achieve, realizing that the landscape we felt called to save is beyond our reach. My message tonight is an affirmation that yes, this work is difficult, if impossible to complete. And you must not get hung up on futility, because your efforts are the object. The achievement of the goal is in its pursuit, not in your success or in the final beholding. How I came to this realization involves a return to northern New Mexico, where my pilgrimage recalls Dogen's passage, "Even if you see mountains as grass, trees, earth, rocks, or walls, do not take this seriously or worry about it. It is not complete realization. These are conditioned views looking through a bamboo shoot at the corner of a sky," end quote. In other words, we see some part of what is unfolding, some narrow slice of the full scope of what is true, and desire, intuition, memory, all fill in the rest until the horizon is full of two worlds, the one that we travel through on foot and the one that we travel in our imagination. I took up watercolor painting later in the summer to try to find my shape and my footing in these two worlds. The first thing I learned is that watercolor is unstable, and depending on the paper and how heavily I load the brush, it moves after I've left it, and sometime overnight or between morning and afternoon, the overall shape might remain, but with blooms of wash and color, depending on the amount of paint, the toothiness of the paper, and the humidity of the room. Over time, I learned, if not how to paint, at least what paint does on paper after I've finished doing my part. I learned, too, that I had the shape of a mountain in me, and that it was always blue. I always painted outside or looking out at the horizon, so I imagined that this motif was just a representation of what I saw, and what I saw looked a lot like what I was painting. I didn't pay too much attention to the fact that mountains aren't blue, unless they're those that breathe up behind the green hills settled in the near and middle distance. And I didn't worry about the fact that they might not look like mountains to anyone but me. I gave a small painting to a friend once, and she just loved it. She held it up, upside down, smiling and searching it, and she asked me what it was, and I said, "It's a landscape." "Is that right?" she said. It was then that I realized there might be a distance between what I was looking at, what I was rendering, and what was there. High up on a red mesa, on a last day on earth kind of quiet that ripples out horizon after horizon, I painted ponderosa pine, pinyon pine, chamisa, and the heady smell of sage. Here was not a trace of my dark, loamy soil, my red maple, sugar maple, oak. I was ages away from the lush green emergence of the Adirondacks and Vermont, from a landscape so familiar that I see its outline behind my eyes when I close them in the sun, and whose fullness I see when I dream. There, standing thousands of feet above my sea-level farm and forest, and miles from my porch-side view of the greens and Lake Champlain, I paint blue mountains. Rilke closes his letter to a young poet by wishing him to be solitary and courageous somewhere in a rugged reality. I hope you are courageous, but never solitary. And to you I say, go forth and take heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. So we're going to quickly transition into our panel of Young Voices, Old Forests. And I will quickly introduce our panelists too, so we can get right into the questions. First, we have Chris Gish. He's the community organizer with Standing Trees. He is a University of Vermont graduate, and he cares deeply for working people and sees protecting public land as a vital piece of the broader struggle to build a livable future for people and all our more than human kin. Next, we have Sophia Galuppo, and she is a student at Middlebury College, majoring in environmental policy with a minor in earth and climate science. And she is also on the board of their environmental advocacy club. And then we have Keetu Winter, whose work focuses on the intersection of place-based living, regenerative finance, regenerative food, and material systems transformation and systemic and cultural change. She's committed to building community resilience through tools and methods that foster connectivity and support the health and dynamism of intact ecosystems, with a focus on giving all life the right to thrive. Keetu is the co-founder and current executive director of the Wellspring Commons, a nonprofit organization working to cultivate a holistic understanding of what it means to live in a mutually thriving relationship with the larger life family. And we may have time for some audience questions once we get through the couple we have planned. So, if you do want to ask them anything, please keep it in mind for when we get to that point. Thank you.
All right.
Would you be okay passing that after that?
Absolutely, yes. I feel like a rock star with no reason to. Okay. The first question is, why are old and wild forests important to young people?
I'll start off some reasons, but I think it's the same reason that a lot of us of all ages are gathered here, the fact that we need these to survive, us as humans and all of our more than human kin. And then I think something that draws me so much to old forests and wild places is like the finding a place of solace and inspiration and getting in touch with a different rhythm of time. And that's something I see with literally every young person I know, and maybe that's just kind of the friends I have, and I'm not friends with anyone who I don't get to go outside with. But especially in these times when maybe more than or differently than other generations, we feel so much precarity about the world and like even how we might make a life, and so much is different. And coming into these places and seeing systems that are working for the mutual benefit of all life is really, it's powerful, and I don't think it can be replaced.
I can just add on to that a little bit. I think it's really important to think of our place in the world today. We're living in so much turbulence, whether that's physically or in the political realm. Young people want to better their mental health. They want to find peace and serenity, and these old forests are a place to find that. And it's such a unique place that you can't get anywhere else, but somehow we keep coming back to not being able to truly access them.
I want to start by saying thank you for writing a letter. It's kind of an unusual experience for me of my generation, so I really appreciate that, and also the invitations from you to me to consider what I'm longing for. And also the ways that you've pointed to the components of an embodied experience. I think those are really important points to consider. And I think nobody's asking me to justify why I care about breathing I think the same should be true for why wild forests and old forests are important. That's one first point. And in my line of, in my work, the core of the work is my relational practices with my beyond human kin, with the living earth community. And those are direct interpersonal practices where I am unlearning a lot and learning how to be, as a sensing being, listening to the communications that are happening all around me, that are communicating in a language that is as old as evolution, which is a lot older than humans. The forested ecosystem is the foundation of life here in the Northeast. I'm going to focus on the Northeast. And healthy, intact forests that are able to be in a state of integrity provide not only the baseline for life, but also so much of the resilience that all life depends on, particularly when we're in a polycrisis. So, trying to figure out which direction to take this train of thought, because there's a few of them. I really long for healthy, intact forested ecosystems that where I can be an integrated part of the larger web of life and step away from this idea that's descended from a time when the colonizers had stripped their land of all their resources, and they came over and they were like, oh hey, there is unlimited resources here for us to do whatever we want with. Let's make all the decisions. I really long to be able to step out of that paradigm and step into a place where I can show up with humility and show up and not be able to know, and that's okay, because I have relationships of trust where I'm being told what to do by my ecosystems. And I'll just add one more point here, that forests, particularly I think the forests of the Northeast, are a really powerful symbol for resilience and regeneration. And forests are metaphors for multi-generational, interconnected, diverse, inclusive, and complex communities with living circular economies that are regenerative and abundantly generous. And we have a lot of trees, but not all of our forested land is able to be in that state right now. So I really long for all of our forests to be able to be in that state. Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, the next question is, how can wildlands and old forest advocates, I don't think it means old advocates, but old forest advocates of all ages, build connections with the young people who will inherit these special places? I don't know who wants to go first. How about Sophia?
I think it's really important to think about young people's place in our system. We know that there's a lot going on in our world, and we're constantly told, it's your generation, you should fix it. And for the most part, we want to, but you don't know where to start. So it's been really helpful in advocacy spaces to have people to reach out to us and help either guide or mentor us to these different places. I'm part of a club on campus at Middlebury where we were able to work with different nonprofits around the state, like with Standing Trees, which lets you to enter this new realm of advocacy that if we didn't have that initial connection from the older generations or people who have experience in advocacy, we wouldn't know where to start. There's so much out there, there's so much to do, but we just sometimes need a little bit of assistance to know, just let's push us in that direction, let's get there together.
Yes, to that. I want to add, I think that was really beautifully worded, and I want to add also that like the youth is like a really overbearing term at this point. Like, please find another way to refer to people who are younger than you that's a little bit less like tokenizing. I say this with love. I think the ways of knowing that we have relied on for hundreds of years are, I know this is kind of sacrilegious to say this in an academic context, but the ways of knowing that we've relied on for hundreds of years are less relevant than ever, because a lot of those are what is driving our current polycrisis. So before, when kids are really little, before we get stuck at desks and taught to think in boxes, kids know, they know what's up, they know what they need, they know what's going on. They really just need access to the resources that support them, elders who empower them and are trusting them, and places where they're invited in, to Sophia's point, to actually be able to convey that. And they also need models of people who know how to be vulnerable and know how to be uncomfortable and know how to be okay with, actually, we don't know the answer, but we're figuring it out together. And I know for me, I look to my elders to support me when I'm having a hard time or to point me towards resources that I need. I usually don't actually need wisdom imparted on me without invitation. Again, I say this with love. And I think one of the biggest things is, again, to Sophia's point, so many of you in the room have grown up with a sense of safety and security that I can't even dream of, and that my little sister, who is Sophia's age, can't even dream of. And so we, as younger folks, are being asked to figure out how to do life and be in a polycrisis and be in an existential crisis and not know the answers, and also figure out how to do an exemplary job at fixing the issues that we're inheriting. And we need, I need more of my elders to be really friggin' real about that. So that's an invitation. I think part of it is, making the space to say, where actually are we, and how can we as a group figure out how to change in the ways we need to change? And the young people are looking to the elders just as much as you guys are looking to us. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. In this next question, I'm going to use the term young people only because we don't have an alternative yet. So how can young people advocate for wildlands and old forests in the Northeast?
There's a lot we can do. Can I also speak to the previous question? I think that, which was more about how people of all ages can support and connect to young people in doing this work. I think those two are really related. But what I was kind of reflecting on from Marianne's talk was we were receiving this invitation to have courage and step out into the world, which is wonderful, and I can always use that reminder for sure. But I would also flip that to you all and say, how can this community of all ages make spaces where it's easy to have courage, and then how can you also have courage yourselves? And for me, some of that, there's really simple things we can think about, accessing these spaces and making spaces that are inclusive. I know quite a few other students and young people who are hoping to make it to this conference and just couldn't financially. And again, that's not a ding on any of the wonderful people involved in putting this on, but just being aware of these dynamics and trying to change them as much as possible, trying to work with young people in your work, and then also being really committed to acting with principles and telling the truth. I think hopefully we're all aware, and definitely us three up here are aware, we're in the socio-ecological polycrisis, biodiversity crisis, climate crisis, all these social crises that make it hard to contemplate even your own personal life. And being really real about that. And as far as our forests keeping some of the basic facts in mind, which can be hard. Like, it can be easy to take some more convenient positions, but we should be clear about how few wildlands there are in New England, which we were reminded of today, how few old forests there are, how urgent it is to recover these forests. And then again, even taking some of the things we take for granted, less for granted, like our wood use, and how can we reduce that? In a place like Vermont, over 70% of the wood that's harvested is burned one way or the other. And just being aware of things like that, and this is just providing this all as an example to the kind of like comprehensive picture and analysis that young people are looking for from our mentors and from the people in positions of relative power. And then thinking about ways that we can get involved then as young people in this work. I think to the extent that you can engage in organizations who are doing some of this work, that's wonderful. And then the flip side is that young people bring a lot of clarity to this work. That's what I was just saying, is like hoping that people of all ages can embrace this discomfort and trying to be comprehensive about how we look at things, but young people can bring those questions to like the academy, to these organizations, to our legislators and anyone who's in a position of relative power. And that's something that's a gift we have at this time. And then the last thing that I think about a lot as far as like how we can advocate for these places is to get to know them well and love them. And there's a lot of like talk about how young people now are less connected to the natural world and on our screens and stuff. And to the extent that people of all ages can make space for that to change and make it easy for these connections to happen, that is so necessary and wonderful. And we know that this work to protect wild forests and old forests is going to span our whole lifetime, many generations after that. So building those deep connections and getting to know these places personally, there's no substitute for that.
I think another important aspect when approaching this question to think about is how we're defining advocacy. A lot of times you're thinking of just going to Capitol Hill and talking to your representatives, being like, we need this to change, or sending in comments, which are all great and very important. I'm not trying to discredit that at all. But there's also a lot to be said within the day-to-day activities that we're doing. As young people, we're living in the age of social media, which, yes, has a lot of issues. We can all agree on that. But it's also a space where you can share stories. And stories are the most important and pivotal part of advocacy. If we can share with a friend that we haven't talked to in a while, oh, hey, I just went for a nice hike in this forest, and now I'm learning that there's these new plans, and who knows if it'll be there next year. Being able to have those connections makes people care. You want to have personal connections, but you can also have connections through friends, and doing so can be through social media. And that's something that we can really utilize as young people when it's often overlooked, because it seems like there's just this duality between nature and tech when this is the state that we're living in. So we can try and utilize it for the better.
Building on both of those points, I think also another form of advocacy, like to your point, is how can we also be making policy and collaborative decisions around agriculture and how we're nourishing ourselves, so that we're relying more on forest foods and agroforestry practices rather than cutting down forests to make more farmland, or cutting down forests to make solar land, or sacrificing farmland to make solar land. Yeah, the same for like how do we recycle more? How do we really check what we're using? And how do we really know that what we're using is going to the place that we're intending to have it be used? That's already like a huge shift. And additional points yeah, actually invite young people in your lives to come to the rooms that you are already in. Just like start with that, young people in your life, and then offer every necessary resource to enable and center their participation. And also support nature-based education programs that help center the relationships between youth and their ecosystems. So kind of to your point, and really looking at our education system. And also asking yourselves, to Chris's point, like where are the protections actually in place so that people have something to show up for if less than 3% of our forests are actually being protected towards long-lasting forests. And just, I think, another general comment on what I've already said is, I'm going to butcher her name, but Anastasia Marikeva, with the biotic pump theory, has pointed out that things are so much more complex than we understand, like so much infinitely more complex. And humans are making so many decisions. We are playing dangerous games with things we don't know. And I mean, we've done that with our own bodies. Like we've had phases where it's like, oh, we'll just remove that organ. It doesn't seem like it's doing anything. That's fine. You know, the trees are our family, and humans play a role in a much larger, very complex web of life that is actually in a very delicate and intricately created balance. And so Anastasia has said if she has a magic wand, she would say, stop cutting trees immediately, like stop deforesting. I know that's also a controversial thing to say here, but I second that. I think there are a lot of other ways that we can meet our needs, and there are a lot of question marks around that, and there are a lot of things that would have to change, but that is something that we should at least consider. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we have run to the end of the hour. I encourage anyone who has additional questions, if our panelists are still around, please come engage with them and ask them and gain more of their viewpoints. And we're very thankful that you've shared them with us today. So give our panel a round of applause.